Welcome in. Today, we're going to explore the critical intersection of legal and ethical responsibilities with cultural responsive practices in school counseling. By the end of this lesson, you'll be empowered to navigate legal and ethical challenges with confidence, protect students' rights with clarity, and advocate for culturally sustaining systems that uplift every learner that you serve. Let's start with the difference between law and ethics. Laws like FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, that gives parents and eligible students access to educational records. But what about when it comes to counseling notes? Those are considered sole possession notes and aren't part of the educational record unless they're shared. That's where ethical discretion matters. Ethics, such as those outlined in ASCA's Code of Ethics, reflects the ideal, what we should uphold, the highest standard of care. When legal and ethical duties conflict, school counselors must understand both frameworks clearly to make informed decisions, protect students, and advocate with integrity. Let's look at the case of North Carolina versus Bradford Central School District from 2004. In this case, a student who had been sexually abused was being considered for special education services. His parents asked that the details of the abuse remain private, fearing further trauma. However, during a professional meeting, the school counselor and social worker shared those details to help determine appropriate services. The parents sued for breach of privacy, but the court ruled in the favor of the school staff. It found that there need to be communication professionally for students to benefit outweighed families' privacy concern. This case reminds us that the ethical decision making often involves navigating complex tensions between students, privacy, and legal duty to collaborate in support of student success. When I started as a school counselor in 2009, my school district had no formal suicide protocol. I often had to make difficult decisions without clear guidance. It wasn't until a decade later that Texas law caught up with the growing crisis, finally mandating suicide prevention procedures in response to the rising youth suicide rate. I'm going to explain to you confidentiality like I explained to my students. So, there's only one of three ways that I'm going to share your story. One, if you give me permission, you say, Mr. H, you can share this with X, Y, or Z. Two, if it's something like suicidal idealization, harm to others, child abuse, that's something where we need to get help and provide wraparound care. Or three, if for some reason we end up in a court and the judge orders me to. But the judge would have to be very specific on what the time and date is of the event. Other than that, I'm not telling your business. So I'm gonna tell you like I tell them. Daniel Helfrich Jr. is many things in this world, but a snitch is not one of them. So you don't have to worry about your narrative getting out on my side. Let's walk through an ethical decision making model, an essential tool for navigating complex situations with confidence and care. The first step is to identify your emotional reactions. You start in by checking in with yourself. What are your emotions that are surfacing? Awareness helps you to stay grounded and objective. The second step is to examine the facts. What do you know to be true and what's missing? Stick to what's verifiable. Step three, review relevant ethical guidelines. Consult the ASCA ethical model and ACA codes to see what applies. Step four, consider parental rights. Ask yourself, what's right? What rights do the parents have in this situation? Are there any legal obligations to inform or involve them? Step five, consider the setting. Where and how the issue takes place matters, whether it's virtual or in person, individual or group. Step six, consider the chronological and developmental level. A student's age and maturity influences how you might approach the situation ethically and effectively. Step seven, identify the nature and dimension of the problem. Is it legal, ethical, clinical, systematic, or a combination? Get clear on what you're truly facing. Step eight, consult. Don't go at it alone. Reach out to a supervisor, colleague, or legal counsel. Step 9, consider possible and probable courses of action. This is where you really want to put on your brainstorming hat and think about what the options are. What could you do? Think wide before narrowing it down. Step 10, examine the good and bad consequences of each decision. Weigh your risks and benefits. Don't just, not just for the students, but for all the stakeholders. Step 11, implement your course of action. Once you decide to take action with confidence, document everything. Can't tell you how many times that saved me. Remember, this model isn't a checklist, it's a guide to help you lead with both clarity and compassion. Now let's pivot to barriers in culturally responsive MTSS implementation. One major barrier identified is the lack of systemic processing for students with elevated needs and training of staff. Think beyond the tier one support. Students struggling with trauma, grief, identity issues, they require constant tier two and tier three services. And these systems must be designed with equity and sustainability in mind. To truly meet the needs of our students, our MTSS system must reflect the lived experience of those we serve. That means being culturally responsive and culturally sustaining. What does that look like? For me, when I was at a middle school campus, it's going to start with recognizing. I'm going to notice possibly a student that isn't eating for a few days in a row. And then there's going to be an acknowledgement. I might go and have a conversation with that student and say, "Hey, I noticed you haven't been eating for a few days." And then the student might tell me, "Oh, Mr. H, you don't understand how that works. I use photosynthesis." And I'm like, "Baby girl, that's not how that works." And then 3, I'm going to connect. I'm gonna really sit down and have a one-on-one conversation and talk about what's going on. In this situation, it could be a situation in middle school where the students don't get choice seating, so they have to just sit around random people that they don't know. So this student may be uncomfortable, or this student may struggle with just eating in front of people in general. So I'm gonna have to ask more questions to investigate. Then I'm going to connect and plug in with the parents and the student and possibly other places to see where might we be able to eat. Could parents bring in other food? And so we're going to talk about different ways to solve the problem. And I'm going to let the student lead that. And I'm just going to brainstorm with the student. And then finally, after we choose a direction, then we're going to evaluate to see how is that working out. And if it's not working out well, then we start over again with the recognizing what's going on. So today we've covered how law and ethics intersect and sometimes collide, the ethical decision making process, privacy, confidentiality, and FERPA, how to advocate for systems that protect students with elevated needs, especially through culturally sustaining MTSS model. Remember, we are not just rule followers, we are system change agents. It's our job to uphold the law, honor ethics, and lead with cultural humility.